Tonight, I want to tell you something that might feel like a relief. You do not have to figure it all out. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. There are people you will hear about in the hours ahead. A woman who stopped making lists, a man who built boats without knowing who would sail them, a widow who planted seeds she could not name. And not one of them figured it all out. And yet, every single one of them found something that felt like peace. So let yourself be here. Let your body settle into wherever you are resting. There is nothing you need to solve tonight, nothing you need to understand. Just listen and let these stories carry you. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this ye small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now, let us settle in together. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. If your mind wanders, that is fine. If you drift in and out, that is fine too. The stories will still be here when you come back. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is offered here. These are stories about being human, about the quiet moments when something loosens inside us, and we realize we have been holding on to something we never needed to carry. Tonight, we will explore teachings and stories drawn from one of the oldest wisdom traditions on earth. Teachings that have helped people rest a little easier for over 2,500 years. They come from the Buddha, from Zen masters, from monks and poets, and ordinary people who discovered, often by accident, that the mind already knows how to be still. It simply needs permission. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding you. Let your drop, not because you are told to, but because there is nothing left tonight that needs you to hold them up. Take a slow, deep breath, not because you have to, but because it feels good to breathe slowly when there is nowhere else you need to be. And if you are lying in bed right now, let the pillow take the full weight of your head. You have been carrying that weight all day, holding it up, keeping it steady, pointing it in the right direction. But right now, there is no direction to point toward. There is only here, there is only this voice, and whatever quiet has gathered around you. Let the weight of the day fall away, one thought at a time, like leaves drifting from a tree that no longer needs them. You do not need to shake the leaves loose. They fall when they are ready, and so will the thoughts if you let them. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma, and let us begin our journey together. Perhaps you know what it is like to have a mind that will not rest, not because anything is truly wrong, not because there is an emergency, or a deadline, or a crisis, but simply because the mind has forgotten how to stop solving. It hums along like a machine, left running in an empty room, turning over problems that may not even be problems, rehearsing conversations that may never happen, making plans for days that have not yet arrived. And the longer it runs, the harder it becomes to find the switch. This is where we begin tonight, with the quiet exhaustion of a mind that has been working overtime for years, perhaps decades, without ever being told that the shift is over. In a town where the oak trees had grown so old that their roots cracked, the sidewalks, There lived a woman who had spent her entire career running a school. For 38 years, she had been the one with the clipboard, the calendar, the answer. Teachers came to her with problems. Parents came to her with worries. Children came to her with scraped knees and broken pencils, and she fixed everything. She was the kind of woman whose mind was always 3 steps ahead, anticipating what could go wrong, preparing for it, solving it before it arrived. And then she retired. The farewell party was lovely. There were flowers and a card, signed by 200 people, and a small crystal clock she placed on the kitchen windowsill, where it caught the morning light and reminded her every day of the time that now stretched out in front of her with nothing to fill it. She still woke at 5 every morning. She could not help it. Her body had been trained by decades of early alarms, and even without one, it rose on its own, alert and ready, as if there were buses to catch and assemblies to organize. She would sit at the kitchen table, in the grey light before dawn, the tile floor cool under her bare feet, the house so quiet she could hear the clock on the wall, measuring out seconds that no longer belonged to anyone's schedule. The smell of coffee drifted from the pot, the same brand she had brewed for 30 years, the same mug with the chipped handle she never replaced, because replacing it would mean admitting something had changed. And she would write a list. She always wrote a list. Monday, clean the hall closet. Call the dentist. Look into that leak in the bathroom. Read that article Margaret sent. Tuesday, grocery store. Return the library books. Research new curtains for the guest room. Wednesday, organize the photos. Call Sarah. Look up that recipe. The lists were detailed and specific, and written in the same careful handwriting she had used for decades of school memos. But the truth she did not say out loud, not even to herself, was that most of the items did not matter. The closet was already clean. The leak was barely a drip. The article would sit unread for another week. She was not making lists because things needed doing. She was making lists because her mind did not know what else to do with itself. It had been trained to plan, and plan it would, even when there was nothing left to plan for. One morning in October, when the light through the kitchen window had turned the color of weak tea, and the oak tree outside had begun to let go of its leaves in that slow, unhurried way that trees do when they are not in any rush to be bare. She was sitting at the table with her coffee and her pen, staring at a blank page, when she heard a voice from the other side of the garden fence. "You are up early again." It was her neighbor, an old woman who had lived next door for as long as anyone could remember. She was always in her garden, even in the cold, even in the rain, kneeling in the dirt with no gloves, her fingers deep in the soil as if the earth were telling her something only hands could hear. Her face was lined in the way that faces become when they have spent more time in the sun than in front of mirrors, and she moved with the slow confidence of someone who had stopped hurrying a long time ago. "I am always up early," she said. "Old habit." "Habits," the neighbor said, not looking up from her roses. "They are funny things. They keep going long after the reason for them is gone, like a wheel that keeps spinning after you have stopped pushing it." She set her pen down. "I keep making lists every morning. I write them out. I follow them. And by evening I have crossed off most of the items. But the next morning I wake up, and the first thing I do is write another one. I do not know why. The old woman stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her knees. She looked over the fence with eyes that had seen a great deal and judged very little of it. You know what I think, she said. I think your mind is still taking the exam. Nobody told it the exam is over. The words landed softly, like a leaf falling onto still water. What do you mean? I mean, for 40 years, your mind had a job. A real one. A hard one. It had to solve and plan and fix and protect. And it did that beautifully. You kept a whole school running. You kept hundreds of children safe. But now the job is done. And nobody sat your mind down and said, you can stop now. It is over. You did well. So it keeps going. Keeps solving. Keeps looking for the next problem. Not because there is one, but because that is what it was trained to do. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not a thought, but a sensation. Like a knot she had not known was there, beginning to give. So what do I do? The old woman smiled. Not a wide smile, just a gentle softening of the lines around her eyes. You tell it, you say. The exam is over. You passed. You do not need to keep answering questions that no one is asking. She paused and looked down at her roses. Thich Nhat Hanh. Do you know him? A Vietnamese monk, very gentle. He once said something I carry with me every morning. He said, do not lose yourself in the past. Do not lose yourself in the future. Do not get caught in your worries or your fears. Come back to the present moment and touch life deeply. That is all. Just come back. She sat with that for a long time after the neighbor went inside. The coffee grew cold in the chipped mug. The page stayed blank. The pen lay untouched beside it. And for the first time in 40 years, she did not write a single thing. She just sat there, watching the autumn light shift across the kitchen floor, noticing how the shadow of the oak tree moved so slowly that you could only see it had moved at all if you were willing to sit still long enough. The clock on the wall kept ticking. But for the first time, she did not hear it as a countdown. She heard it as a heartbeat, steady, unhurried, asking nothing of her. And that was enough. Tonight, if your mind is doing this, running through tomorrow's list, replaying today's conversations, rehearsing solutions for problems that may never arrive, you are not broken. You are not failing at rest. You are simply a mind that was trained to solve doing what it was trained to do. And there is nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with you. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it papancha. And it is one of those Pali words that sounds almost like what it describes. Papancha is the mind's habit of taking one small thought and spinning it into 1,000, not because the thoughts are needed, not because they are useful, but simply because the mind, left to itself, proliferates. It builds, it expands, it elaborates. One worry becomes 10. One question becomes a labyrinth. One memory becomes a courtroom, where you are both the prosecutor and the defendant, presenting evidence for a trial that no one called. And the gentle truth the Buddha offered is this: you do not have to follow every thread the mind spins. You do not have to solve every question it raises. You can simply notice the spinning and let it slow on its own, not by force, not by fighting it, not by adding another item to the list that says, stop making lists, but by giving the mind something quieter to rest on, a breath, a story, the sound of a voice in the dark. There is a river not far from here, or perhaps it is far, perhaps it is nowhere at all. Perhaps it is the kind of river that exists only in the mind, which is the best kind of river for a night like this. This river does not stop to ask if it is flowing in the right direction. It does not pause at the bend to wonder whether it should have turned left instead of right. It does not look back upstream to see if it missed something important. It does not compare itself to the river in the next valley and worry that it is not deep enough, not fast enough, not clear enough. It simply flows, and the stones in the riverbed do not resist the current. They do not try to hold the water in place. They do not build small dams of worry to slow the passing of each moment. They have been worn smooth, not by effort, but by years of letting the water pass over them without clinging to it. They are beautiful, not because they tried to be, but because they stopped trying. Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen teacher, who brought a quiet revolution to the way many people think about the mind, once wrote, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few." Perhaps the river has a beginner's mind. It does not know where it is going. It has no map, no plan, no list. And that is exactly why it arrives. And perhaps the mind, too, does not need to know where it is going to find its way somewhere good. In a workshop by the sea, where the salt air had turned the wooden door frame soft and silver, and the floorboards had long ago absorbed the rhythm of the tides, there lived a man who built boats. He was not young. His hair had gone white a long time ago, and his hands were the kind of hands that told you everything about his life without him having to say a word. Thick fingers, scarred across the knuckles, the nails always carrying a thin line of sawdust underneath, no matter how many times he washed them. He had built boats for 50 years, not large ones, not the kind that crossed oceans or carried cargo. Small boats, rowboats, dinghies, the kind a person could take out onto a quiet lake on a Sunday morning and sit in, doing nothing at all, watching the light change on the water. His workshop smelled of fresh wood and sea salt, and something deeper, something that might have been time itself. The slow, patient accumulation of decades spent doing one thing well. Shavings curled on the floor like fallen ribbons. The tools hung on the wall in an order only he understood, each one worn to the shape of his hand. And in the center of the room, always, there was a boat in progress, the ribs exposed, the hull still open, the keel resting on two sawhorses, like a sleeping animal dreaming of water. He never rushed. There was no reason to. The sea was not going anywhere, and neither were the fish, and neither was he. There was a window in the back wall, and in the late afternoon, the light came through it at a low angle that turned the sawdust floating in the air into something golden, something almost sacred, as if the workshop were a small church and the dust motes were the congregation, drifting upward without purpose, catching the light simply because they were there. One afternoon, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She had been walking along the shore and had seen the sign, hand-painted, sun-faded, nailed to a post at the edge of the road. Boats. She stood there watching him work for a while before she spoke. He did not seem to notice her, or if he did not feel the need to acknowledge her until she was ready. "How do you know when the boat is finished?" she asked. He did not look up right away. He ran his hand along the side of the hull, slowly, the way you might run your hand along the back of a sleeping dog, feeling for something that could not be seen, only felt. His palm moved from bow to stern, pausing in places, pressing gently in others. "You do not decide it is finished," he said finally. "Then how do you know?" He set down the plane he had been using, brushed the shavings from his apron, looked at her with the kind of patience that comes from having been asked questions for 50 years, and never once being in a hurry to answer them. "You listen to the wood," he said. "The wood tells you when you run your hand along it and there is nothing left that catches, no rough spot, no place where the grain resists your palm, then it is done. Not because you decided, because it is ready. But what if you miss something? What if there is a flaw you did not feel?" He smiled. Not a wide smile, just a small shift at the corners of his mouth. The kind of smile that has been worn smooth by time, like the stones in the riverbed. "Then the water will find it," he said, "and that is fine too. The water always finds what needs finding. That is not your job. Your job is just to listen to the wood. And when the wood has nothing left to say, you stop. That sounds too simple. Most true things do." She stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something more. A formula, a technique, a method she could write down and carry home. But he had already picked up the plane again, and the sound of wood being shaped filled the room. Slow, rhythmic, steady, like breathing. She nodded, though he was not looking, and she walked back out into the afternoon, carrying with her something she could not name, not an answer exactly, but the feeling that answers might not be what she needed. He did not watch her go. He did not wonder if she understood. He simply continued. The wood beneath his hand was almost smooth, almost ready, almost done. Outside, a gull called once, and then was quiet. The tide had turned while they were talking, and the water was pulling back from the shore in that slow, breathing way it does. Retreating, not because it is leaving, but because it will return. The air coming through the open door had shifted from warm to cool, carrying with it the smell of wet sand and kelp, and the particular saltiness that only arrives when the sea is exhaling. The sawdust settled in the late light. The sound of the waves outside slowed and deepened, as the tide does when the afternoon softens into evening, and the boat sat there on its sawhorses, half finished, unhurried, becoming what it was always going to become. Not because anyone was forcing it, but because that is what wood does when patient hands give it time. What the old woman in the garden was pointing at, and what the boat builder has lived inside for 50 years, is something the mind already knows, but rarely trusts. It is the knowledge that not everything needs to be figured out, that some things that resolve themselves, not through effort, but through patience, not through planning, but through presence, not through gripping tighter, but through opening the hand. Ajahn Chah, the Thai forest monk, whose words carried the weight of a man who had sat with his own mind for decades, once said something so simple, it almost sounds like it cannot be true. The heart of the path is quite easy. There is no need to explain anything at length. And perhaps that is what rest is. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of the need to do something with every thought that arises, letting the thoughts come and go, like sawdust in the light, like leaves on the river, like waves against the shore, arriving, dissolving, arriving again without anyone keeping score. Perhaps, as you hear this, your shoulders have already begun to soften. Just a little, just enough. Perhaps your jaw has released a tension you did not know it was holding. Perhaps your hands, wherever they are resting, feel heavier than they did a few minutes ago. This is not something you need to create. This is not something you need to earn. Your body has been listening to these stories too, and it has already begun its own quiet journey toward rest. The mind that has been solving all day, all week, all year, all your life, does not need another solution tonight. It needs permission. Permission to stop. Permission to not know. Permission to let the exam be over. And tonight, that permission is yours. The exam is over. You passed a long time ago. You passed before you even knew you were being tested. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Notice what has already begun to soften since we started this journey together. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else the mind holds on to. Something quieter than thoughts, but heavier. It is the belief that if we just plan enough, try hard enough, hold on tightly enough, we can keep everything from changing. We can keep the people we love exactly where they are. We can keep the world steady beneath our feet. And there is a story about a woman in a garden who discovered, quite by accident, that the tightest grip is the one that hurts the most. There is something else the mind holds on to. Something quieter than thoughts, but heavier. It is the belief that if we plan enough, try hard enough, hold on tightly enough, we can keep everything exactly as it is. We can keep the people we love safe. We can keep the future from arriving in the wrong shape. We can keep the ground steady beneath our feet. And this belief is not foolish. It comes from love. It comes from caring so deeply about something that the idea of letting it unfold on its own feels like a kind of recklessness. But tonight, we are going to sit with a quieter question. What if the tightest grip is the one that hurts the most? Take a breath. Let it come slowly, and let it go without deciding where it goes. In a house with a garden that had been tended for 30 years, there lived a woman who had raised 3 children. She had raised them well, with packed lunches and bandaged knees and bedtime stories, and the kind of fierce, tireless attention that mothers give without ever counting the cost. She had driven them to school and waited up for them at night and worried about them in the particular way that mothers worry, which is to say constantly, invisibly, and without ever expecting to be thanked for it. And then, one by one, they left. The oldest moved to a city she had never visited, a place with tall buildings and a climate she did not trust. The middle one married someone she had met only twice, a kind man with a quiet voice and plans she was not part of. The youngest went abroad for a job that the woman did not fully understand, in a field she could not pronounce, to a country where the seasons ran backward, and the phone calls came at odd hours because the time zones never quite aligned. The house, which had once been so full of noise, and shoes by the door, and cereal bowls left on the counter, and the sound of someone always coming or going, grew quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a library, but the startled quiet of a stage, after the actors have left, and the lights are still on, and no one has told the audience to go home. The garden was still there. The roses she had planted when the children were small. The patch of herbs by the kitchen window. The old wooden bench her husband had built before his knees gave out. She spent more time there now. Kneeling in the dirt in the late afternoon, the sun warm on her back, the smell of cut grass and damp earth rising around her. Bees drifted between the roses with a low, contented hum. A wren sang from somewhere inside the hedge, invisible but close. She still called her children every day. She could not help it. The habit of worrying did not leave when the children did. It simply changed shape. Instead of worrying about scraped knees and school reports, she worried about their choices. Were they eating well? Were they happy? Were they making the right decisions? She would lie awake at night composing questions she would never ask. And then, in the morning, she would call and ask different questions that meant the same thing. How are you? Are you sleeping? Have you seen a doctor about that cough? Her youngest daughter had recently stopped answering every call. Not out of cruelty, out of the particular exhaustion that comes from being loved in a way that feels like surveillance. The woman knew this somewhere beneath the worry. She knew that the calls had become too many, the questions too pointed, the care too heavy. But knowing did not stop her. The worry was older than reason. It had its own engine, its own momentum, and it ran on a fuel she could not name. One afternoon, she was kneeling beside the rosebush, the oldest one, the one she had planted the year her first child was born. It was blooming extravagantly, the way roses do in late spring, when the rain has been generous, each bud opening in its own time, some still tight and furled, others wide and shameless, petals beginning to soften at the edges. And she thought, I planted this, I watered it, I pruned it, I fed the soil, but I never once told it when to bloom. The thought arrived without drama, the way important thoughts sometimes do. Not like lightning, but like dawn, slowly, quietly, changing the color of everything without making a sound. She had done everything she could for the roses. She had given them the best soil, the best light, the best care her hands could offer. And then she had stepped back and let them become whatever they were going to become. She had never once stood over a bud and demanded that it open. She had never once pulled a petal back to make the bloom arrive faster. She had trusted the rose to know its own timing. Ajahn Chah, the forest monk who spent his life in the jungles of Thailand, watching the mind, the way a gardener watches the soil, once offered this. If you let go a little, you will have a little happiness. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of happiness. If you let go completely, you will be free. She set the watering can down in the grass. She sat back on her heels. She did not call anyone. She just sat there in the garden, watching the roses do what roses do, which is to open, slowly in their own time, without anyone's permission. The sun moved across the petals. A bee landed, gathered what it needed, and left. The wren sang again from the hedge. And for the first time in a very long time, the woman in the garden was not trying to make anything happen. She was simply watching something happen on its own. What she was beginning to see, though she might not have had words for it yet, is something that Zen Master Dogen pointed toward 800 years ago when he wrote, "Past mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped." It is a strange thing to say, if you think about it. We spend so much of our lives trying to grasp, trying to hold the past in place so we can understand it, trying to hold the present still so we can control it, trying to hold the future close so we can shape it. And Dogen is saying, very gently, that none of these can be held. Not because we are weak, not because we are failing, but because that is the nature of things. The mind moves, The moment passes. The future arrives as something other than what we planned. And our suffering, so much of our suffering, comes not from the movement itself, but from our insistence that it should stop. Tonight, if you are holding on to something, a plan that did not work out, a person who is changing in ways you did not expect, an outcome you cannot control, notice how the holding feels in your body. Is there a tightness in the chest, a clenching in the hands, a weight in the stomach that has been there so long you have stopped noticing it? That is what grasping feels like from the inside. Not dramatic, not violent, just a quiet closing of the hand around something the hand was never meant to keep. And the letting go is not dramatic either. It is not a grand gesture, or a moment of spiritual breakthrough, or a scene from a movie, where someone opens their arms on a mountaintop and cries. It is simply the hand remembering that it can open, that it was designed to open. That opening is not loss, it is return. A return to the natural shape of things. The shape the hand was in before it learned to clench. The shape it returns to, in sleep, every night, without being told. There is a story, a very old one, told in many versions across many traditions, about a scholar who traveled a great distance to visit a Zen master. The scholar was brilliant and well-read, and had spent decades studying philosophy, theology, the great traditions of East and West. He arrived at the master's small house with a head full of theories and a mouth full of questions. The master invited him to sit and offered to pour tea. The scholar began talking immediately about what he had read, what he believed, what he thought the master should know about his credentials and his studies. The master listened without expression and began to pour. The cup filled. The tea reached the brim, and the master kept pouring. The tea spilled over the edge of the cup, across the saucer, onto the table. The scholar jumped back. "The cup is full," he said. "No more will go in." The master set the pot down. "Like this cup," he said, "you are full of your own opinions and plans. How can I show you anything until you first empty your cup?" The scholar stared at the puddle of tea on the table. It was warm and fragrant, and going nowhere in particular. And for the first time in a very long time, he had nothing to say. Sometimes the wisest thing a cup can do is to empty itself. Not because what it held was wrong, but because there is something new waiting to be poured. On a cliff, above a stretch of coastline, where the rocks were black and jagged, and the sea had been arguing with the land for 10,000 years, there stood a lighthouse. It was not a tall one, not the kind you see in paintings, white and proud against a dramatic sky. It was squat and weathered and practical, built by people who cared more about light than beauty. And it had stood there for over a century, doing one thing well. The man who kept it had been there for 40 years. He had arrived as a young man, with strong legs and a quiet disposition, and now he was old, and his legs were less strong, but the disposition had not changed. He moved through the lighthouse the way the tide moves through the rocks below. Slowly, surely, without wasted motion. He knew every step, every hinge, every sound the building made. When the wind came from the north versus the east, he knew the particular groan of the metal railing when the cold was sharp enough to contract the bolts, and the way the glass panels in the lantern room hummed when the gusts exceeded 40 knots. Tonight, the gusts were exceeding 50. The storm had been building since afternoon, the sky darkening from grey to slate, to something almost black, the sea, rising in swells that lifted and dropped with a power that made the cliff itself seem temporary. Rain drove sideways against the windows. The wind found every gap in the old stone walls and whistled through them with a sound that was almost musical, almost human, as if the storm were trying to tell him something he already knew. He stood at the window of the lantern room, one hand resting on the metal frame, feeling the cold seep through his palm. Below him, the sea was white, not the gentle white of foam on a summer beach, but the urgent churning white of water in argument with itself. Somewhere out there, he knew, there were boats. There were always boats in a storm. Fishing vessels caught out, cargo ships rerouted, small craft whose owners had misjudged the weather. He could not see them. He could only keep the light turning. A young man, his apprentice, barely 25, still new enough to be frightened by weather, came up the spiral staircase with 2 mugs of coffee. "It is getting worse," the young man said, handing him a mug. His hands were shaking, though whether from cold or fear was hard to tell. "It is," the old man said. "Can we not do something more? Signal someone? Call the Coast Guard?" "The Coast Guard knows. They always know. That is their work. But the boats are not mine." He said it without coldness, with the kind of gentleness that comes from having said it to himself 1,000 times over 40 years. "The sea is not mine. The wind is not mine. The choices those captains made this afternoon, to sail or not to sail, those are not mine either. Then, what is yours?" The old man took a sip of coffee. He looked at the light turning above them, steady, patient, indifferent to the storm. "The light," he said, "the light is mine. I keep it burning. I keep it clean. I make sure it turns when it should turn and shines when it should shine. And then I let it do what light does." The young man was quiet for a moment. The wind screamed against the glass. "And if it is not enough, if someone does not see it, then it is not enough. And that is a sorrow I will carry in the morning. But it does not change what I do tonight. Tonight keep the light burning. That is all I have. And it is enough." They stood there together in the lantern room, the old man and the young one, watching the beam sweep through the rain and the dark. Thich Nhat Hanh once offered this. Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. If, in our heart, we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free. The old man did not know that quote. He had never read Thich Nhat Hanh, but he had lived those words for 40 years without knowing their source, the way a river follows gravity, without knowing Newton, the way a flower opens toward light, without knowing the sun's name. The storm passed some time before dawn. The old man did not see it pass. He had fallen asleep in the chair by the window, his coffee cold, his hand still resting on the arm of the chair, as if holding something gently. The young man had gone downstairs hours earlier. When the old man opened his eyes, the sea was calm. The sky was the color of pearl, pale and soft, and washed clean, the way the sky always looks after it has spent itself. The rain had stopped. The wind had dropped to a whisper, and the light was still turning. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from the cold, and looked out at the water. It was flat and silver, and so still it looked like a mirror that someone had laid across the earth. There was no sign of the storm, no wreckage, no distress, no drama. Just the sea, doing what the sea does after anger, which is to become very, very quiet. He did not know if anyone had seen the light. He did not know if any boat had found its way home because of it. And he found, as he had found for 40 years, that not knowing was bearable. More than bearable. It was a kind of freedom, the freedom of having done what was his to do, and releasing the rest to the water and the wind and the choices of strangers he would never meet. What the woman in the garden understood about her roses, and what the old lighthouse keeper has practiced, without calling it practice for 40 years, comes down to a single word in the old language. Upadana. It is not a dramatic word. It does not crash or thunder. It simply describes the way a hand closes around something and forgets it can open. The way the mind wraps itself around a worry, a plan, a person, and holds on so tightly that it mistakes the holding for love. But love is not holding. Love is tending. Tending the light, tending the soil, and then stepping back to let the light do what light does, to let the soil do what soil does, to let the people you love become who they are becoming. Even when you cannot see the shape of it, even when the shape is not what you planned. Perhaps your breath right now is the only thing you need to tend to. Not fix, not improve, not deepen or slow down or make more mindful. Just notice, just let it come and go the way the tide comes and goes. The way the beam of light sweeps across the water. Not because you are directing it, but because it knows its own rhythm. Your breath has been breathing you all day, all week, all your life. It has never once needed your permission. And tonight, you can let it continue without supervision. You can let your hands rest open. You can let the cup be empty. You can let the exam be over, and the garden tend itself, and the light keep turning without you standing watch. Let us rest here for a moment. Take one slow breath, and let it carry whatever it carries out into the dark. When you are ready, we will continue together. And sometimes, when the hand finally opens, when the grip releases and the fingers unfurl, and the palm turns upward, what it finds is not emptiness. What it finds is something that was there all along, waiting quietly beneath the holding. Something that does not need to be grasped to be real. Something very much like trust. And sometimes, when the hand finally opens, when the grip releases, and the fingers unfurl, and the palm turns upward, what it finds is not emptiness. What it finds is something that was there all along, waiting quietly beneath the holding. Something that does not need to be grasped to be real. Something very much like trust. Trust is a strange word for a night like this. It sounds too bright, too certain, too much like something that belongs in the daytime. But the trust we are talking about tonight is not the bold kind. It is not the trust of contracts and guarantees. It is the quieter kind. The kind that plants a seed without knowing what will grow. The kind that steps into the dark without a map and says, perhaps this will be all right. Perhaps I do not need to see the whole road to take the next step. Take a breath here. Let it be slow, and let us follow that thread. In a house that had once been full and was now mostly empty, a woman sat in the living room on a winter night with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. She was 62, and she had been alone for just over a year. Though alone was not quite the right word. She was surrounded by things. The shelves were full of books they had read together, or planned to read together, or bought for each other, and never opened. The walls held photographs from 34 years of holidays and birthdays, and ordinary afternoons that had not seemed special at the time, but now seemed like the most important moments of her life. His chair was still in the corner. She had not moved it. She had not been able to. It was a green armchair with a worn spot on the left armrest where his elbow had rested through thousands of evenings, reading, dozing, watching the news with his glasses sliding down his nose. She had thought about moving it, giving it away, covering it with a throw, so it looked intentional rather than abandoned. But every time she reached for it, something in her hands refused, as if moving the chair would be the last thing, the final admission that he was not coming back to sit in it. The house made sounds at night that she had never noticed when he was alive. The settling of old wood, the ticking of the radiator as it heated and cooled, the particular creak of the third stair, which had always sounded like a question, as if the house itself were asking, "Is someone coming up?" And now the answer was always no. She had spent the past year trying to figure out what came next. She had made plans and abandoned them. She had signed up for a pottery class and quit after 2 sessions. She had considered moving closer to her daughter, then decided against it. Then considered it again. The future, which had always been a shared project, something they built together, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, was now a blank page she did not know how to fill. Every plan she made felt like it was written in someone else's handwriting. One evening in February, when the wind was sharp and the dark came early, and she had run out of things to occupy the hours between dinner and sleep, she found herself standing in front of the hallway closet. She was looking for a scarf, something warm, something that still smelled like the old life, and instead she found a small cardboard box on the top shelf, pushed to the back behind winter hats and a broken umbrella. Inside were seed packets, 5 of them, brown paper envelopes slightly crumpled, with no labels, no writing at all except a date penciled in his handwriting. 3 years ago. He must have bought them and forgotten, or saved them for a spring that never came, or tucked them away for some reason she would never know. She held them in her hands for a long time. The envelopes were light, almost weightless, and she could feel the tiny shapes of the seeds through the paper, small and dry and impossibly still. She did not know what kind of flowers they were. She did not know if they were still viable. After 3 years in a dark closet, she did not know if he had chosen them with care or grabbed them on impulse from a display near the register at the hardware store. She did not know anything about them at all, and for reasons she could not explain. Perhaps because the evening was long, and the house was quiet, and there was nothing else to do, or perhaps because holding something he had touched felt like a conversation she was not ready to end. She decided to plant them. She planted them in early March, when the ground was still cold and the forecast was uncertain. She knelt in the back garden, in the small patch of earth beside the fence that had always been his territory, and she pushed the seeds into the soil with her fingers. She did not know how deep to plant them. She did not know how far apart they should be. She watered them and covered them with a thin layer of mulch, and stood up with dirt under her fingernails and a feeling in her chest that was not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that rhymed with hope without committing to it. And then she waited. She waited through the rest of March, when the rain came and went, and the ground stayed stubbornly brown. She waited through April, checking the patch each morning from the kitchen window, seeing nothing but mulch and mud, and the occasional weed she pulled with more care than it deserved. She waited, without knowing what she was waiting for, which is perhaps the purest form of waiting there is. And then, in the second week of May, something appeared. Small green shoots, thin as threads, pushing up through the soil in a ragged line. They were tentative at first, barely visible, easily mistaken for weeds. But within days they grew taller and stronger, and began to form buds she did not recognize. They were not roses, not tulips, not anything she had planted before. When they finally bloomed, in late May, on a morning so bright, it felt like the sun was trying to apologize for the long winter. They were cosmos, tall, delicate, with petals like colored tissue paper, in shades of pink and white and deep magenta. They swayed in the slightest breeze, and caught the light in a way that made the whole corner of the garden look like it was breathing. She stood on the back porch with her tea, the same tea she always forgot to drink, and she looked at the flowers her husband had chosen 3 years ago and never planted. She did not know why he had chosen cosmos. She did not know if he had imagined them in this corner of the garden, swaying like this, catching the light like this. She did not know, and she would never know. And for the first time, the not knowing did not ache. It felt like a gift. The last surprise, from a man who had always been full of quiet surprises, tucked away in closets and pockets and the margins of the life they had shared. She did not cry. She did not feel sad. She felt something else, something she had not felt in over a year. She felt held, not by a person, not by a plan, but by something she could not name. Something that had been working beneath the surface all along, in the dark, in the cold, in the months when nothing seemed to be happening at all. Something that did not need her to understand it in order to be real. Shunryu Suzuki once wrote, "Now it is raining, but we do not know what will happen in the next moment. By the time we go out, it may be a beautiful day or a stormy day. Since we do not know, let us appreciate the sound of the rain now. Tonight, if you are lying here, not knowing what comes next, not knowing how the story of your life continues from here, not knowing whether the seeds you have planted will bloom or whether the ground you are standing on will hold, you are not lost. You are simply in the part of the story where the seeds are underground, where the rain is falling and nothing seems to be happening, where trust is not a feeling, but a decision, a very quiet, very ordinary decision to keep watering anyway. There is a way that seeds rest in the dark that is worth thinking about tonight, if thinking is something your mind still wants to do. If not, just listen and let the image do the thinking for you. A seed buried in soil does not know what it will become. It has no picture of the flower on a packet. It has no gardening book. It has no plan. It sits in the dark, surrounded by earth and moisture and the slow chemistry of things it cannot see. And it does the only thing it knows how to do. It opens. Not because it has figured anything out, not because it has solved the problem of growth, but because opening is what seeds do when the conditions are right. The warmth arrives, the moisture arrives, and something inside the seed responds, not with effort, but with surrender. A quiet unfurling, a giving in to a process it did not design and does not control. And the seed does not need to see the sun to grow toward it. It grows toward the light before it has ever seen the light. It trusts something it has never met, and it has never once been wrong. Every flower you have ever seen began in the dark, in the not knowing, in the quiet patience of soil and water and time. Perhaps tonight you are the seed. Perhaps the dark is not a problem to solve, but a place to rest, a place where something is happening that you cannot see yet. Something patient, something slow, something that does not need your supervision. In a village where the mornings came in through the windows, like warm water, there was a woman who had been weaving cloth since before she could remember learning how. Her mother had woven, her grandmother had woven, and she had taken it up the way one takes up breathing, not as a choice, but as a continuation. Something the hands do because the hands have always done it. Her workshop was a small room at the end of a narrow lane with a single window that faced east. So the morning light came in first thing and fell across the loom like a benediction. The walls were bare except for two finished cloths hung for display, one deep indigo, one the color of turmeric, and the floor was swept clean every evening, though by midday it was always dusted with loose threads in every color, as if a rainbow had come apart in its sleep and scattered itself across the wooden boards. The loom itself was old, older than her mother, made of dark wood that had been polished by decades of hands until it shone like something living. It filled most of the room and made a sound when she worked that was both mechanical and musical, a rhythmic clacking and sliding, the shuttle passing back and forth like a small boat crossing a narrow river, the threads tightening with each pass until the cloth grew, inch by inch, too slowly to see, but too steadily to deny. She worked with her hands and her feet and her whole body, leaning into the rhythm, the way a rower leans into the oars. Her fingers were rough and calloused, but they moved with a gentleness that contradicted their texture, sorting threads, correcting tension, guiding the shuttle with a touch so light it looked like she was petting something alive. One morning, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She was from the city. You could tell by her shoes, which were clean, and by the way she stood, which was careful, as if she were afraid of touching something she did not understand. "I have been watching you from the lane," the girl said. "You work without a pattern." The old woman did not stop weaving. "I have a pattern," she said. "It is just not written down. But how do you know what the cloth will look like when it is done? You cannot see the whole thing from where you sit. You can only see a few inches at a time." "That is true. Doesn't that worry you? What if it comes out wrong?" The old woman smiled without looking up. Her hands kept moving. Shuttle, press, slide, shuttle, press, slide. The rhythm unbroken, like breathing. "Wrong according to whom?" she said. The girl did not have an answer for that. When you are reading a book," the old woman continued, "do you need to see the last page to enjoy the sentence you are on? No. But a book was written by someone who already knows the ending. And so was this cloth," the old woman said quietly. "My hands know the ending, my mind does not. And I have learned, after many years, that my hands are better at this than my mind." She passed the shuttle through once more, and the thread, a deep, almost purple blue, settled into place beside its neighbors as if it had always been there, as if it had been waiting for exactly that spot. "You do not need to see the whole cloth," she said. "You only need to trust the next thread, and the thread after that, and the thread after that." And one morning you step back, and there it is, something beautiful that you could never have planned, because the beauty was in the not planning. The beauty was in the trusting. Thich Nhat Hanh once offered this. Fear keeps us focused on the past or worried about the future. If we can acknowledge our fear, we can realize that right now we are okay. Right in this moment, we are still alive, and our bodies are working marvelously. The girl stood there for a while longer, watching the shuttle move back and forth, listening to the clacking of the loom and the birdsong outside and the quiet breathing of the old woman at her work. Then she nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they have understood something they cannot yet put into words, and she walked back out into the morning. The old woman did not watch her go. She had already returned to the cloth, which was growing beneath her hands, the way all things grow, one moment at a time, one thread at a time, too slowly to see, but too steadily to doubt. The morning light shifted across the unfinished cloth, catching the blue threads and making them glow, as if the fabric itself were remembering the sky it came from. What the widow discovered in her garden, and what the weaver has known for longer than she has had words for it, is something the body understands better than the mind. There is an old Pali word for it, saddha. It is usually translated as faith, but that translation carries too much baggage, too many associations with belief and doctrine and certainty. Saddha is quieter than that. It is not blind belief. It is not the faith that says, "I know everything will be fine." It is the gentle confidence that says, "The ground will hold me, even when I cannot see it. The seeds will grow, even when I cannot watch them. The cloth will come together, even when I can only see one thread at a time." Ajahn Chah put it as simply as anyone ever has. Of course, there are dozens of meditation techniques, but it all comes down to this: just let it all be. Just let it all be. Not because everything is perfect, not because nothing needs to change, but because right now, in this moment, the letting be is enough. Your heart has been beating without your guidance since before you were born. It has never once asked for your opinion. It has never once waited for your permission. It beats in the dark, in your sleep, in your worry, in your grief, steady, faithful, patient. It is the oldest thread in your cloth, and tonight you can trust it to keep weaving while you rest. Perhaps your heartbeat right now is the sound of trust. Not loud, not dramatic, just there, just steady, just enough. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the body settle deeper into wherever it is resting. Let the breath slow. Let the heartbeat be the only thing that is working tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. And there is a kind of freedom that only arrives when you stop needing to know. A spaciousness that the mind discovers when it finally sets down all its answers and sits empty-handed in the open air. It is the freedom of not knowing. And it is lighter than you might expect. There is a kind of freedom that only arrives when you stop needing to know. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with trumpets or certainty or the satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. It arrives more like a window opening in a room you forgot had windows. A sudden coolness, a new angle of light, a sense of space where there had only been walls. Shunryu Suzuki wrote, "If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything." And perhaps that is what not knowing really is. Not an absence, but an openness. Not a failure of the mind, but a gift the mind gives itself when it stops filling every silence with an answer. We spend so much of our lives collecting answers. We gather them like kindling, stacking them against the cold, building walls of certainty to keep the unknown out. And there is comfort in that. There is real comfort in knowing, but there comes a point, and perhaps tonight is that point, when the walls we have built with our knowing begin to feel less like shelter and more like a cage, when the answers, so carefully collected, begin to weigh more than the questions they were meant to resolve. There is an old story, not from any scripture, not from any tradition, just the kind of story that lives in the air between people who have stopped trying to impress each other. A small child, maybe 5, maybe 6, sat with her grandmother on the porch of a house in a town where the evenings came slowly, like honey poured from a jar. The sky was doing what skies do in late summer, turning colors that have no names, shifting from blue to gold to something between pink and memory. "Why is the sky blue?" the child asked. The grandmother looked at the sky for a long time. Then she said, "I do not know." "Why do birds sing?" The grandmother listened. Somewhere in the trees, a thrush was offering its evening song. That liquid, unhurried melody that sounds less like music and more like the day exhaling. "I do not know that either," she said. "Why does the wind blow?" "I do not know." The child was quiet for a moment. She leaned against her grandmother's arm, which was soft and warm and smelled faintly of lavender and kitchen soap. Then she said, very simply, "I like talking to you. You do not pretend." The grandmother smiled. It was the kind of smile that does not need teeth or effort, just a softening around the eyes, a warmth that comes from having lived long enough to know that not knowing is its own kind of wealth. And they sat there together, not knowing anything, watching the sky do things that neither of them could explain, and finding that the not explaining made the sky more beautiful, not less. The thrush kept singing, the evening kept arriving, and neither the child nor the grandmother needed to understand any of it to be held by it completely. Perhaps the wisest thing anyone can say is "I do not know." Not because knowledge is bad, not because answers are wrong, but because the pretending, the constant, exhausting performance of having it all figured out, takes more energy than most of us realize. We carry it like an invisible weight, the need to have an opinion, a plan, a position, a response to every question the world throws at us. And when we set it down even for a moment, something loosens, something breathes. Something in us remembers what it felt like before we started pretending. In a house filled with more books than most people read in a lifetime, there lived a woman who had spent 40 years looking for answers. She had been a professor of philosophy, the kind of professor whose students either loved her or feared her because she asked questions that could not be answered in a paragraph, and she expected them to try anyway. She had published papers and given lectures and sat on panels where very intelligent people debated very large ideas with very small words, and she had been good at it. Better than good. She had been brilliant, and now she was 67, and she was retired, and the books were still there, but the questions had changed. Her study was a room on the second floor that looked out over a garden she rarely visited. The walls were lined with shelves, floor to ceiling, double stacked in places, the overflow forming small towers on the floor, and the desk and the windowsill. The room smelled of old paper and dust, and the particular mustiness that comes from thousands of pages slowly releasing their ink into the air. A desk lamp with a green glass shade threw a circle of warm light across a surface buried under journals and notebooks and a coffee cup that had been there long enough to develop a ring. She sat in this room every evening reading. She had read Plato and Aristotle and Nietzsche and Heidegger. She had read the Upanishads and the Tao Te Ching and the complete works of Simone Weil. She had read until her eyes ached and her back hurt, and the sentences blurred into each other like watercolors left in the rain. And after all of it, after 40 years of reading and thinking and arguing and publishing, the question that sat with her most heavily was the one none of the books could answer. What is a life for? Not in the abstract, not as a philosophical exercise, but specifically hers. What had her life been for? Had the papers mattered? Had the lectures reached anyone? Had the years of thinking added up to something? Or had they been a very elegant way of avoiding the question by studying it? She did not say this out loud. She did not write it in a journal. She simply carried it the way one carries a stone in a pocket. Always there, always pressing, never quite heavy enough to set down. One Thursday evening, a woman came to clean. She came every other week. A woman in her 50s with short grey hair and hands that moved with a practical efficiency that suggested she had cleaned many houses and thought about very few of them. She vacuumed and dusted and scrubbed the bathroom and never touched the books, which was the one instruction she had been given and the one she followed without question. On this particular evening, the cleaning woman paused in the doorway of the study. The professor was sitting at her desk, staring at an open book she was not reading. The lamp threw her shadow across the shelves behind her, making her look both larger and lonelier than she was. "You have a lot of books," the cleaning woman said. It was the first time in 3 years she had said anything that was not about the cleaning. "Yes," the professor said. "Too many, probably." "Have you read them all?" "Most of them. Some of them more than once." The cleaning woman nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. She leaned against the doorframe and folded her arms. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. After all these books, do you know the answer?" The professor looked at her. "The answer to what?" "To whatever you have been looking for in all these books. Do you know it yet?" The question was so direct, so free of pretension, that it landed like a stone thrown into still water. The professor opened her mouth to give the kind of answer she had given 1,000 times. Nuanced, qualified, intellectually honest. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the hour. Perhaps it was the tiredness. Perhaps it was the fact that this woman, who had never read Heidegger, and probably never would, had just asked the only question that mattered. "No," she said, "I do not." The cleaning woman did not look surprised. She did not look smug or disappointed or triumphant. She simply nodded again, in that matter-of-fact way she had, and said, "I never finished school. I do not know much about philosophy or any of that, but I know that the stars do not need explaining to be beautiful. And I think maybe the same is true for most things. Pema Chodron once wrote about this, about our capacity to relax, with not knowing, not figuring everything out, with not being at all sure about who we are or who anyone else is either. She called it groundlessness, and she said that most of our suffering comes not from the uncertainty itself, but from our resistance to it, our desperate, exhausting attempt to put solid ground under our feet in a world that was never designed to hold still. The professor sat at her desk for a long time after the cleaning woman left. The book in front of her was still open to a page about epistemology, the study of what we can know and how we know it. She looked at the words on the page. They were precise and careful and logically arranged, and for the first time in 40 years, they seemed like a very elaborate way of avoiding the obvious, which is that some things cannot be known, and that the not knowing is not a gap to be filled, it is a window to be looked through. She closed the book. She reached over and turned off the desk lamp. And in the sudden dark, she looked out the window, really looked, perhaps for the first time, and saw the stars. They were there, as they had always been, asking nothing, explaining nothing, beautiful beyond the reach of any sentence she had ever written or read. How much of your life have you spent trying to find the right answer, the right decision, the right path, the right way to feel about what happened, the right way to plan for what has not happened yet? And how much of that searching has been driven, not by genuine curiosity, but by the fear that not knowing means something is wrong with you? Tonight, nothing is wrong with you. The not knowing you carry is not a flaw. It is the most natural thing in the world, as natural as the sky that the child could not explain, as natural as the stars the professor finally saw when she turned off the lamp. Not knowing is not the absence of wisdom. It is the beginning of it. In a place where the water was so still, in the early morning, that you could not tell where the lake ended and the sky began, there was an old man who fished. He had fished this lake for longer than most people in the town had been alive. He knew its moods, the way it turned green in late summer when the algae bloomed, the way it went silver and hard in winter, the way it softened in spring and became approachable again, like a person who has been angry for a long time and has finally decided to forgive. He came every morning before dawn, while the mist was still thick on the water, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine resin, and the cold mineral scent of the lake itself. His boat was small and wooden and old, older than his marriage, older than his children, older than the ache in his left knee that told him the weather was changing. He rowed out to the center, where the water was deepest, and he dropped his line, and he waited. The oars rested in the locks. The boat drifted just enough to feel alive. He always waited. That was the whole of it. He did not use sonar or depth finders, or any of the electronic devices his grandson had tried to buy him. He used a hook and a line and patience. The kind of patience that does not count minutes because it has stopped believing that minutes are the point. One morning in October, his granddaughter came with him. She was 15 and restless, in the way that 15-year-olds are, full of questions and opinions, and the particular energy that comes from believing the world should be moving faster than it is. She sat in the bow of the boat, wrapped in a blanket, watching him set the line. The mist curled around the boat like something alive, and the water made small lapping sounds against the hull that were so regular, they sounded almost like breathing. "How do you know where the fish are?" she asked. "I do not." "Then why do you come to this spot?" "Because I have always come to this spot." "That is not a reason." He smiled. The line hung in the water, disappearing into the dark below the surface. Somewhere beneath them, in the cold and the silt and the slow underwater currents, things were moving that neither of them could see. "You are right," he said. "It is not a reason. It is a habit, and I have found that habits are sometimes wiser than reasons." "But what if there are no fish here today?" "Then there are no fish here today. Doesn't that bother you?" He looked at her, his granddaughter, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and the beautiful, maddening certainty of the young, that everything should have an explanation. "The lake gives what it gives," he said. "I just show up. That is all I have ever done. I show up, and I put the line in the water, and I wait. And sometimes the lake gives me a fish, and sometimes it gives me silence. And I have learned, after a long time, that both are worth having." Zen Master Dogen once pointed toward this same truth when he wrote, "To know the way of the Buddha is to know about self. To know about self is to let go of self. To let go of self is to be awakened by myriad things." Perhaps the old fisherman did not know Dogen, but he knew the lake, and the lake had taught him the same thing, that the deepest knowing comes not from grasping, but from releasing, not from figuring out, but from showing up, not from demanding that the water yield its secrets, but from sitting quietly and letting the water be water. The granddaughter was quiet for a while. She stopped asking questions. She looked out at the mist, which was beginning to thin in places, as the sun rose behind it, turning the world from grey to gold, in increments so small they were almost invisible. And for a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10, she heard the lake. She heard the water against the boat. She heard the silence between the sounds. She heard the morning arriving, unhurried, with no agenda, expecting nothing from her. The mist dissolved, halved. The sun cleared the tree line, and the lake, which had been hiding beneath its silver blanket, revealed itself, blue and deep and endless, in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with stillness. What the grandmother on the porch understood, and what the professor discovered when she turned off her lamp, and what the fisherman has practiced every morning for decades without calling it practice, is something the old traditions have a word for. In Pali, the language the Buddha spoke, there is a concept called DTT, views, opinions, the fixed positions the mind takes and defends, as if they were territory to be held. The Atthakavagga, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's words, is devoted almost entirely to the freedom that comes from releasing these views. Not because they are wrong, but because the holding is what hurts. The quiet freedom that comes when you stop insisting the world must match what you think about it is unlike any other freedom. It does not require you to be strong. It only requires you to be open. Shunryu Suzuki said it another way. We should not hoard knowledge. We should be free from our knowledge. And your body already knows this. Your body is doing 1,000 things right now that it never asked your mind about. Healing a scratch you forgot you had, filtering your blood, regulating your temperature, replacing cells that wore out yesterday with cells that will carry you through tomorrow. Your body does not need to understand biology to be alive. It does not need to read a manual to breathe. It simply does what it does, with a competence so quiet and so total that you have probably never thanked it. Tonight, let your body teach your mind what not knowing looks like. Let your lungs breathe without your supervision. Let your heart beat without your management. Let your muscles soften without your instruction. The body has been trusting the unknown since the day you were born. The mind is simply catching up. Let us rest here. Let the breath do what it does. Let the night be what it is. When you are ready, we will continue together. And perhaps the deepest not knowing of all is the one we carry about ourselves. The quiet question of whether we have done enough, been enough, lived enough. There is a story about that too. And it begins with a woman who spent 40 years taking care of everyone but herself, and who discovered, on a very ordinary evening, that she had been enough all along. And perhaps the deepest not knowing of all is the one we carry about ourselves. It is the quiet, persistent question that hums beneath the surface of a life well lived. The question that does not go away, no matter how many boxes we check or milestones we pass. It is the question, have I done enough? Not enough in the way the world measures, not promotions or awards or the number of zeros in a bank account, but enough in the way that matters at the end of a long day, when you are lying in the dark, and the only audience is yourself. Have I been a good enough mother? A good enough friend? A good enough person? Have I made the right choices? Have I loved well enough? Have I lived well enough? Tonight, I want to sit with that question, not to answer it, because the answer has been there all along, waiting for you to stop looking past it, just to sit with it, and to see what happens when we stop measuring. Take a slow breath. Let it carry nothing. Let it arrive empty and leave full. In a small apartment, on the 3rd floor of a building, where the elevator had been broken for 2 months, there lived a woman who had spent 40 years taking care of other people. She had been a nurse, the kind who stayed late and came in early and knew every patient by name, the kind whose shoes were always comfortable and whose hands were always warm, and whose voice could make a frightened child stop crying just by saying, very quietly, everything is going to be all right. She had retired in March. The hospital had given her a cake with yellow frosting and a card that said, "Thank you." And her co-workers had hugged her, and some of them had cried. And then she had driven home and sat at the kitchen table and realized that the apartment was very quiet and the evening was very long. And she did not know what to do with a day that did not begin with someone else's emergency. The apartment was small, just the right size for one, her daughter had said, which was a kind way of saying it was too small for two, and her daughter felt guilty about living 3 states away. The kitchen had a window that looked out over a parking lot, which was not beautiful, but at night, the street lights turned the puddles orange, and if she squinted, she could pretend they were lanterns along a canal in some European city. She had always meant to visit, but never had. She sat at the kitchen table most evenings with a cup of chamomile tea that she brewed more out of routine than desire. The table was old. Oak, bought second-hand when the children were small, scarred by homework and holiday meals, and the particular roughness that comes from 30 years of being the center of a family's life. She ran her fingers along a groove in the surface, a mark left by her son's pen, pressing too hard during some long-forgotten essay. And she thought about all the things she had not done. She had not saved enough money. She had not traveled to Italy, which she had wanted to do since she was 22, and had seen a photograph of a bridge in Florence that looked like it was dreaming. She had not written the book she had always said she would write, a book about night shifts and the strange, tender things that happen in hospitals between midnight and dawn. She had not called her mother often enough before her mother died. She had not taken enough photographs. She had not said "I love you" enough times to the people who needed to hear it, though she had said it more times than most. The list was long and familiar. She carried it the way other people carry wallets. Always on her person, always within reach, always ready to be opened and reviewed. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, as she sat at the kitchen table, with her tea growing cold and the streetlights turning the puddles to amber outside, her hand found a photograph tucked behind the sugar bowl. It must have slipped there weeks ago. She was always tucking things into odd places and forgetting them, a habit her children teased her about. It was a photograph from the hospital, 30 years old. The colors faded to that particular warmth that old photographs carry, as if the past were permanently bathed in golden light. In the photograph she was young, impossibly young, it seemed to her now, and she was holding a newborn baby. It was Christmas Eve. She remembered it. Suddenly, completely, the way memory sometimes returns. Not as a thought, but as a feeling. A physical sensation that starts in the chest and spreads outward. The baby had been born at 11:47 on Christmas Eve to a mother who was 17 and terrified and alone. And she had held that baby in the first light while the young mother slept, and she had whispered to it, though she could not remember what she had said, something small, something true, something that did not need to be remembered to have mattered. She held the photograph in both hands. The woman in it smiled back at her from 30 years ago. Tired, young, holding a stranger's child with the kind of care that cannot be taught, only given. And she thought of something she had read once, long ago, a line from a Japanese poet. A monk who lived alone in a hut with almost nothing, who wrote, "I do not regard my life as insufficient. Inside the brushwood gate, there is a moon. There are flowers." She did not know the poet's name, but she understood what he meant. She understood it the way you understand a song, in a language you do not speak, not through the words, but through the melody. Through the feeling that rises when something true is said simply. She had been enough. She had always been enough. She had held babies in the dark and whispered to them. She had sat with dying people and made sure they were not alone. She had driven her children to school 1,000 mornings and packed their lunches and worried about them and loved them in the relentless, unglamorous way that mothers love, without applause, without recognition, without ever stopping to ask whether it counted. It counted. All of it counted. The book unwritten, the trip not taken, the calls not made. These were not failures. They were simply the spaces between a life that had been full of hands held and fevers cooled, and nights stayed through and mornings shown up for again and again. For 40 years. She set the photograph on the table, leaning it against the sugar bowl so the young woman in the picture could see the kitchen. She took a sip of tea. It was cold. She did not reheat it. She did not add honey or pour a fresh cup. She simply drank it as it was, cool and mild and faintly sweet. And she found that cold chamomile tea, drunk slowly at a scarred oak table on a spring evening in a small apartment with a view of a parking lot, was one of the most satisfying things she had ever tasted, not because it was good, but because she was finally paying attention to it. Outside, the streetlights came on, the puddles glowed amber, and the apartment, which had felt too quiet all evening, now felt like exactly the right amount of silence. Not empty, just still, the way a room feels after a long conversation has ended, and the warmth of it is still in the air. What she was arriving at, slowly, the way all the most important arrivals happen, is something the old traditions call santuti. It is a Pali word, and it means contentment, but not the contentment of having everything you want. It is the contentment of recognizing that what you have, what you are, is already sufficient, not perfect, not complete in the way the mind demands completeness, but sufficient, enough. The way a single candle is enough to read by, the way a single meal is enough to sustain you, the way a single life, honestly lived, is enough to matter. Tonight, if you are carrying a list of things you wish you had done differently, a catalogue of regrets and missed turns and roads not taken, I want to offer you this. The list is not the truth of you. The list is the mind doing what the mind does, keeping score in a game that was never being played. The truth of you is not in what you did not do. It is in what you did, in the hands you held, in the mornings you showed up for, in the quiet, uncounted moments of care that no one saw and no one recorded, but that changed the shape of someone's day. There was once a monk who lived alone in a small hut at the edge of a village. He owned almost nothing: a robe, a bowl, a brush for calligraphy, and the view from his window, which happened to include the moon. One night, while he was away, a thief came. The thief took everything: the robe, the bowl, even the brush. When the monk returned and found the hut empty, he stood in the doorway and looked at the mess of footprints on the floor and the open window through which the thief had climbed. Then he looked up. The moon was there, full and white and impossibly still, hanging in the sky like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to be noticed. "Poor fellow," the monk said softly, speaking of the thief. "I wish I could have given him this moon." He could not steal the moon. He could not steal the way the light fell across the empty floor. He could not steal the silence, which was deeper now than it had been before. And the monk, standing in his emptied hut, with nothing left to lose, discovered that what remained, the moon, the silence, the night air coming through the open window, was not just enough. It was everything. Sometimes we do not know what is essential until everything else has been removed. Sometimes the robbery is the gift, not because losing things is pleasant, but because losing things can teach us what was never ours to begin with, and what was always ours, no matter what. The moon does not belong to anyone, and that is exactly why it belongs to everyone, including you, including tonight, including right now, whether you can see it through your window or not. In a town where the farmer's market opened before the sun did, there was a woman who had been selling flowers for longer than most of her customers had been alive. She was 78, and she moved with the slow deliberateness of someone who had learned that hurrying was a form of rudeness to the body. Her hands were knotted with arthritis, but they worked the stems with a tenderness that contradicted their appearance. Cutting, arranging, wrapping each bouquet as if it were a small gift she was preparing for someone she loved. Her stall was at the far end of the market, near the old stone wall, where the morning glories climbed. She arrived at 4:30 every Saturday, before the sky had fully committed to being light, and she set out her buckets and her flowers and her handwritten price signs with the patience of someone performing a ritual she had performed 10,000 times. The air at that hour smelled of damp earth and coffee from the truck at the entrance, and the particular sweetness of lilies, which is the kind of sweetness that fills a space without taking anything from it. The dew was still on the roses when her granddaughter arrived. The girl was 23, freshly graduated, full of the particular restlessness that comes from having just been released into a world that seems both vast and insufficient. She came most Saturdays, partly to help, partly because the market was the one place where the morning felt like it belonged to her. She watched her grandmother cut the stems of a dozen white roses with a pair of scissors, so old the handles had been wrapped in tape. Each cut was precise. Each stem went into the bucket at exactly the right height. It looked effortless, which meant it had taken decades to learn. "Grandma," she said, leaning against the stone wall, "do you ever wish you had done something bigger?" The old woman did not look up. She was trimming a lily, removing the pollen-heavy anthers so they would not stain anyone's shirt. "Bigger than what?" "Than this. Than selling flowers. You are so smart. You could have done anything. Gone to college, run a business, traveled." The old woman set the lily in the bucket. She wiped her hands on her apron, a faded blue thing with pockets full of twist ties and rubber bands. And she looked at her granddaughter with the kind of gentleness that comes from having been asked this question before, perhaps many times, perhaps only by herself. "I have watched 10,000 sunrises from this spot," she said. "I have put flowers in the hands of strangers on the worst mornings of their lives. Funerals, hospital visits, days when they could not find a reason to get out of bed. I have watched children smell their first rose. I have watched old men buy flowers for wives they have loved for 50 years and still do not know how to tell. What could be larger than that?" The granddaughter did not have an answer. Ajahn Chah once said, "When we see beyond self, we no longer cling to happiness. And when we stop clinging, we can begin to be happy." The flower seller did not know Ajahn Chah. She did not know Pali. She did not meditate or chant or sit in any formal way. But she had seen beyond self every Saturday for 50 years. Seen it in the face of a stranger receiving flowers. Seen it in the simple exchange of beauty for money, which was really an exchange of care for trust. The granddaughter helped arrange the remaining bouquets. They worked in silence for a while, side by side, the younger hands faster, but the older hands surer. The sun crested the rooftops across the square and fell across the flower stall in a warm, golden wash that turned the white roses to cream and the pink ones to something unnamed. Something between blush and light. "I think I understand," the granddaughter said very quietly. The old woman smiled, a smile that had been polished by decades of early mornings and small exchanges, and the particular joy of watching someone receive something beautiful and she handed her granddaughter a lily. "Good," she said. "Now put this in water before it gets thirsty." Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it." And perhaps that is what contentment is. Not the absence of desire, but the gentle recognition that this moment, exactly as it is, already contains enough. Not perfect, not everything you dreamed of, but enough. The way a lily is enough. The way a sunrise is enough. The way a single act of care, repeated 10,000 times over 50 years, is enough to constitute a life of extraordinary meaning. Even if no one writes it down, even if no biography is ever published, even if the only record is the fading memory of strangers who once held flowers they did not expect to receive. Tonight, your body is the proof of enough. This body carried you through today. It carried you through yesterday, and the day before, and every day of your life. It has healed wounds you forgot about. It has fought infections you never knew you had. It has kept you breathing through every worry, every fear, every sleepless night. And tonight, it is still here, still carrying you, still showing up the way the flower seller shows up at 4:30 every Saturday morning. Not because it is easy, but because it is what it does. And that is enough. Let the body rest now. Let the weight of it sink into wherever it is resting. Feel how heavy the arms have become. Feel how the legs have stopped asking to move. This heaviness is not fatigue. It is arrival. It is the body saying, "I am done for today. I have carried you far enough. Now let me set you down. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the night hold what the day could not. When you are ready, we will continue together. And if enough is already here, if it has always been here, hiding in plain sight beneath the striving and the measuring and the endless keeping of score, then perhaps the striving can stop. Perhaps you can stop swimming against the current and let the river carry you. There is a story about a woman who learned this by a riverbank on an afternoon when the leaves were falling and she had nothing left to prove. And if enough is already here, if it has always been here, quiet and patient, waiting beneath the noise of striving, then perhaps the striving can stop. Perhaps you can stop swimming against the current. Stop pushing the river. Stop trying to make the water go somewhere it was not already going. Perhaps you can let the river carry you. There is a story about a woman who learned this. She learned it not in a temple or a classroom or from a book, but on a riverbank, on an afternoon when the leaves were falling, and she had nothing left to prove. Take a breath. Let it be the breath of someone who has stopped swimming. In the autumn of the year she lost her job, a woman found herself walking along the river near her house. A river she had driven past every day for 15 years without once stopping to look at. She had been the kind of person who drove past rivers. She had been the kind of person who drove past everything: sunsets, parks, the faces of strangers, because there was always somewhere more important to be. For 25 years she had run a company, and for 25 years she had been the engine that kept it moving. The person who answered the phone at 11 at night, and the person who arrived first in the morning, and the person everyone turned to when things went wrong, which was often because things always go wrong when you are paying close enough attention. And then, one Thursday afternoon, the company decided it no longer needed an engine. Or rather, it decided it needed a different engine, younger, cheaper, more fluent in languages she had never learned to speak. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the wall behind the head of the man who was letting her go. And she counted the seconds the way a diver counts breaths, carefully, because her life depended on it. She walked out of the building with a box of things she did not need, and a severance check, and a feeling in her chest that was not sadness, exactly, but more like the sensation of stepping off a treadmill that has been running at full speed for a quarter of a century. The ground felt strange. Her legs felt strange. The air felt like it belonged to someone else's afternoon. And so she walked to the river. It was October. The trees along the bank had turned the colors that trees turn when they are finished, pretending to be permanent, gold and rust, and the deep, burning orange that looks like sunset caught in the branches. Leaves fell slowly, spiraling down through still air, landing on the water and drifting downstream without resistance, without plan, without the slightest indication that they minded where they were going. The water was brown and warm-looking, moving steadily but without hurry, the way rivers move when they have been flowing for so long that urgency has lost its meaning. It made sounds where it passed over stones, not loud sounds, just the quiet, continuous murmur of water, doing what water has always done, which is to find the lowest point and rest there. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, and that particular autumn scent that is both an ending and a promise, the smell of things returning to the ground they came from. She sat on the bank. She did not sit gracefully. She sat the way tired people sit, heavily, without caring what the ground does to their clothes. She pulled her coat tighter and watched the river. For the first time in 25 years, she had nowhere to be, and the nowhere felt enormous. Not liberating, not yet. Just enormous. Like standing in a room so large you cannot see the walls. An old woman was sitting downstream on a folding chair, fishing. She had a rod and a bucket and a thermos, and the peaceful expression of someone who had spent a lifetime not catching fish, and had made her peace with it long ago. She wore a hat that had seen better decades and rubber boots that came up past her knees, and she was watching the river with the kind of attention that most people only give to things that matter. "You look like someone who just stopped running," the old woman said, without looking up from the water. She was startled. "Is it that obvious?" To a fisherman it is. We spend a lot of time watching things arrive at the bank. People, leaves, the occasional tire. She reeled in the line slowly, nothing on the hook. She did not seem to mind. "What were you running from?" "I was not running from anything. I was running towards something. Always towards something. The next goal, the next quarter, the next problem that needed solving. And now there is nothing to run toward." The old woman cast the line again. It asked through the air and landed on the water with a small, satisfied sound, like a period at the end of a sentence. "You know what I have learned from this river?" she said. "I have learned that the river does not need me to push it. It was flowing before I sat down. It will be flowing after I leave. The current does not need my opinion. The water does not need my encouragement. It just goes, and it always arrives." Ajahn Chah, the forest monk, put it this way: learn to let go without struggle. Simply let go, to be just as you are. No holding on, no attachment, free. The woman on the bank looked at the river. She watched a leaf detach from a branch above and spiral down to the surface. It landed gently, tilted for a moment as if deciding, and then the current took it. It moved downstream, not fast, not slow, just moving, past rocks and roots and bends in the bank, carried by something it did not control and did not need to understand. "But what if I do not know where the current goes?" she asked. "The leaf does not know either," the old woman said. "And the leaf is doing fine." She sat on the bank for a long time after the old woman packed up her chair and left. The afternoon softened. The light changed from gold to amber, to the quiet grey that comes before evening. The river kept flowing, the leaves kept falling, and she sat there, not planning, not strategizing, not building the next 5-year roadmap in her head. She just sat. A duck landed on the water downstream, tucked its wings, and let the current carry it. It did not paddle. It did not steer. It simply sat on the surface and drifted, its reflection trailing beneath it like a quiet agreement. She watched it until it rounded the bend and disappeared, and she realized she had been holding her breath without knowing it. She let it go, and the letting go felt like setting down a suitcase she had been carrying through an airport that had no gates, no flights, no destination. Just the endless habit of carrying. For the first time in 25 years, this afternoon had no agenda. And the sitting, which should have felt like nothing, felt like the most productive thing she had done in 25 years. Perhaps you have been swimming too, swimming against something. A feeling you did not want to feel, a change you did not choose, a loss you have been trying to reverse by sheer force of will. Swimming upstream, muscles burning. Because somewhere along the way you learned that effort is the answer to everything, and rest is what happens when you have earned it. And you have not earned it yet. Not quite. Not yet. But the river does not ask you to earn it. The river does not keep score. It simply flows. And tonight, if you can stop swimming, even for a moment, even just for the length of this breath, you may find then that the current was going somewhere good all along, that it was carrying you, even when you thought you were carrying yourself. There is a tree that knows something about this. You have seen it. Perhaps in a park, perhaps along a road, perhaps in a painting. The willow. A willow tree does not resist the wind. When the gust comes, and the gusts always come, in every life, in every season, the willow does not stiffen. It does not brace. It does not plant itself harder and push back with everything it has. It bends. The long branches sweep downward. The leaves trail like fingers in water. The whole tree curves toward the ground as if bowing to something it respects, but does not fear. And when the wind passes, and the wind always passes, the willow rises again. Not because it is strong in the way that oaks are strong, with thick trunks and stubborn roots, but because it is strong in a different way. It is strong the way water is strong, the way breath is strong, the way anything is strong that does not need to prove it. The oak, for all its muscle, is the one that breaks in the storm. The willow, for all its softness, is the one still standing in the morning. Perhaps tonight you can be the willow, not fighting the wind, not resisting the current, just bending, just allowing, just being flexible enough to survive what the rigid cannot. The willow does not call its bending a defeat. It does not apologize for swaying. It simply moves with what moves through it, and when the moving is done, it stands again, not unchanged, but unbroken, in a bakery at the end of a quiet street, in a town where the winters were long, and the bread was the best reason to get out of bed. There was a woman who had been baking since before her hands knew any other shape than the shape of dough. She was old now, 80, maybe more. She had stopped counting when the number stopped mattering, and she worked through the night the way she had always worked, alone, in the warmth of a kitchen lit by fire. The oven was brick, old brick, hand-laid by her father. When the building was young, and the neighborhood still smelled of horse carts and coal smoke, it held heat the way old things hold memory, deeply, faithfully, releasing it slowly over hours. The air in the kitchen was thick with it, a warmth that was not just temperature but presence, the kind of warmth that wraps around you like a shawl and makes you forget that the world outside is cold. Flour dusted the wooden floor in a fine white layer that shifted when she walked, as if the room itself were breathing. The kneading table was scarred and smooth, scarred from decades of blades and rolling pins, smooth from decades of palms, pressing dough in the same circular motion, over and over, until the wood had memorized the gesture. Her hands moved through the dough with a rhythm that did not require thought. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. The way a heart beats, the way a river flows, the way anything moves when it has been moving long enough to forget that it ever started. The smell of baking bread filled the kitchen and leaked out through the cracks in the old walls and drifted into the street, where it mixed with the cold night air and became something that could wake you from a dream and make you hungry for something you could not name. Her grandson came in around midnight. He was 19, studying engineering at a university 2 hours away, home for the weekend, because his grandmother's bread was better than anything the city could offer, and because her kitchen was the only place where the noise in his head went quiet. He stomped the snow from his boots and hung his coat on the hook by the door and stood there, watching her work. "How do you know when the bread is done?" he asked. She did not look up. Her hands kept moving through the dough, steady, rhythmic, unhurried. "You do not know," she said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you do not know. You cannot know. The bread is inside the oven. You cannot see it. You cannot touch it. You cannot ask it how it is feeling." She smiled, the kind of smile that lives more in the eyes than the mouth. You put in the flour and the water and the yeast and the salt. You knead it until your hands tell you it is ready. You shape it. You put it in the oven, and then you wait. But how long? As long as it takes. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him. "You trust the heat. You trust the time. You trust the dough. You trust that the same thing that has happened every night for 60 years will happen again tonight. And then you open the door and see what has become. And if it has not risen, then it has not risen. And you try again tomorrow, but it almost always rises. Because the dough knows what to do. It does not need you to stand by the oven and worry. The worrying does not help the bread. It only tires the baker." Dogen Zenji, the Zen master who founded the school of just sitting, once wrote, "When you let go, the Dharma fills your hands." The baker did not know Dogen. She did not sit in meditation or study sutras, but her hands knew what Dogen was talking about. They had been letting go and being filled for 60 years. Letting go of the dough when it was ready to rise. Letting go of the bread when it was ready to bake. Letting go of the night when it was ready to become morn. Meaning, she opened the oven door. A wave of heat rolled out, carrying with it the smell of bread at its most alive. That moment when the crust has darkened to gold and the inside is still soft and the whole loaf is breathing steam into the cool air like a small, warm animal just born into the world. The bread had risen. It always rose, not because she made it rise, but because she trusted the heat, and the heat was trustworthy. They sat together at the kneading table, grandmother and grandson, eating warm bread with butter in the middle of the night. The butter melted into the warm crumb and pooled in golden drops on the wooden surface. Outside, snow fell past the kitchen window in slow, fat flakes that caught the light from the oven and glowed for an instant before disappearing into the dark. Neither of them said anything, because some moments are already complete and words would only make them smaller. What the woman by the river discovered and what the willow practices with every wind and what the baker has trusted every night for 60 years is something the Pali tradition calls vosaga. It means release, relinquishment. The final breath of clinging, not a dramatic gesture, not a spiritual breakthrough accompanied by celestial music, but a quiet opening of the hand. The moment when the fingers stop gripping and the palm turns upward and what was held is set free. Not because it was worthless, but because the holding was heavier than the thing itself. Pema Chodron wrote, "Sticking with uncertainty is how we learn to relax in the midst of chaos, how we learn to be cool when the ground beneath us suddenly disappears." And perhaps, tonight, the ground has disappeared. Perhaps you are lying here, and the ground, the certainty, the plan, the structure you built your days around, is not there anymore. And perhaps that is terrifying. Or perhaps, if you are very tired, it is something else. Perhaps it is relief. The relief of no longer having to hold the ground in place. The relief of discovering that you can float. You cannot force yourself to sleep. You already know this. You cannot command the mind to be quiet or order the body to relax or schedule the exact moment when consciousness will dissolve into rest. Sleep is the ultimate surrender. It is the one thing you absolutely cannot achieve by trying harder. You can only create the conditions, the dark, the warmth, the quiet, the voice, and then you let go. You trust the process. You trust the body. You trust that the same thing that has happened every night of your life will happen again tonight. And it will. The bread always rises. The river always flows. The willow always stands up in the morning. And sleep, when you stop chasing it, always arrives. Let us rest here. Let the body be heavy. Let the breath be slow. Let the river carry you. When you are ready, we will continue together. And when the river has carried you far enough, when the current has brought you to a place you could not have planned, a bend in the water you never saw on any map, you may find that the mystery you have been running from is actually the ground you have been standing on all along. It was never something to solve. It was something to rest in. And when the river has carried you far enough, when the current has brought you to a place you could not have planned, you may find that you have arrived somewhere unexpected. Not a destination, not an answer, but a place where the questions themselves have grown quiet. A place where the mystery is no longer something to solve, but something to rest in. There is a story, a very small one, the kind that fits in the palm of your hand. An old woman sat on the porch of her house on a summer evening. The air was warm and still, thick with the scent of honeysuckle climbing the railing, and the sky was doing that thing it does in the hour before dark, turning colors that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the atmosphere, as if the sky were remembering something it had seen a long time ago and trying to paint it from memory. Her granddaughter, 7 years old, barefoot, still young enough to ask the questions that matter, sat beside her on the wooden step, her chin resting on her knees. "Grandma," she said, "what happens after we die?" The old woman was quiet for a long time. A firefly blinked in the garden. Then another, then a whole constellation of them, appearing and disappearing in the dark like tiny thoughts the night was having and then letting go of. "I do not know," the old woman said. The child waited, expecting more. When more did not come, she looked up. "You do not know?" "No. Does that scare you?" The old woman smiled. One of those smiles that seem to arrive from very far away, from a place where fear and peace have had their argument, and peace has won, not by being louder, but by being more patient. "No," she said, "I think it is wonderful." "Why?" "Because it means there is still something left to discover, and I have always loved discovering things." The fireflies kept blinking. The honeysuckle kept breathing its sweetness into the warm air. And the child, satisfied in the way that only children can be satisfied by an honest answer, leaned her head against her grandmother's arm and watched the dark become beautiful. Shunryu Suzuki, when asked about the nature of reality, often answered with 2 words that contained more than most books. Not always so. Not always so. 3 words that crack open every certainty and let the air in. 3 words that remind us that the mind's favorite hobby, deciding what things are, sorting them into categories, nailing them down, is a useful hobby, but not the only one. Sometimes the mind can simply rest. Sometimes not knowing is its own kind of arrival. In a cabin on the side of a mountain where the pine trees grew so thick they blocked the sky in summer and held the snow in winter like cupped hands holding water, there lived a woman who had chosen solitude the way other people choose cities. Not because she was running from something, but because she had finally found what she was looking for. And it happened to be quiet. She was 73. She had lived in the cabin for 11 years. Since the year her husband died, and her children urged her to move closer to town, to a place with neighbors and grocery stores, and the particular noise of other people's lives that is supposed to keep loneliness at bay. She had tried it for 6 months. She had rented a small apartment near her daughter and filled it with familiar things, and gone to the grocery store every Tuesday and smiled at the neighbors, and done everything a person is supposed to do after loss. And then, one morning in April, she had driven up the mountain and not come back. The cabin was 1 room with a loft for sleeping, built by someone decades ago, from logs that had darkened with age to the color of strong tea. The floor was planked pine, worn smooth by years of feet. A wood stove sat against the far wall, black iron, squat, the kind that holds heat for hours after the fire has died, radiating warmth like a patient animal. A single window faced east, toward the valley below, and in the morning the light came through it, in a long, golden beam that moved across the floor, like a slow hand, touching everything once before moving on. In winter, the world outside the window disappeared into white. The pine trees bent under the weight of snow. The path down the mountain filled in overnight and had to be cleared each morning with a shovel that was older than she was. The silence was enormous, not empty, but full. The way a held breath is full, containing everything that has not yet been said. She did not mind the silence. She had come here for it. One December evening, her granddaughter arrived. The girl was 28 and worried about her grandmother's health, worried about the isolation, worried about the things that young people worry about when they love someone old and cannot understand why that person has chosen to live in a way that seems, from the outside, like a slow form of disappearing. She stamped the snow from her boots in the doorway and unwound her scarf and stood there, breathing hard from the climb, her cheeks red, her eyes adjusting to the warm dimness of the cabin after the blinding white outside. It is freezing, Grandma. It is December. That is what December does. The old woman was sitting in a chair by the wood stove, a blanket across her lap, a cup of tea in her hands. The fire crackled softly. A candle burned on the table beside her, its flame steady and unhurried, casting a small circle of gold that made the rest of the room feel darker and more intimate, like a conversation being had in whispers. The granddaughter sat on the floor by the stove, pulling her knees to her chest, the way she had done as a child. "Are you not lonely up here?" "I am alone," the old woman said. "That is not the same as lonely. But do you not miss people? Conversation? Things happening. Things are happening. The fire is happening. The snow is happening. You are happening." She took a sip of tea. The world does not stop being interesting just because you stop filling it with noise. The granddaughter was quiet for a moment. She watched the fire through the small glass window of the stove door, the way the flames moved, without pattern, each one different from the last, each one unrepeatable. "But do you not worry about your health, about being alone if something happens, about, I do not know, the future?" The old woman set her tea down. She looked at her granddaughter with an expression that was neither pity nor condescension, but something closer to tenderness. The tenderness of someone who remembers what it felt like to be afraid of the unknown and has since discovered that the unknown is not what she thought it was. "I have stopped needing to know what happens next," she said. "And that is when everything became interesting." Thich Nhat Hanh once offered this: "Life is available only in the present moment. If you abandon the present moment, you cannot live the moments of your daily life deeply." The old woman did not know that quote, but she had been living it for 11 years. In the way she watched the fire, without needing it to be anything other than fire. In the way she listened to the snow falling without needing it to mean anything. In the way she sat with the mystery of her own remaining in time, without trying to calculate how much of it was left. They sat together for a long time in the warm cabin. The fire softened to embers, the wood collapsing inward with a soft sigh, sending a brief shower of sparks up the chimney, like tiny prayers released into the dark. The candle burned lower, its wax pooling into a small translucent lake around the wick. Outside, the snow fell in thick, slow curtains, each flake catching the faint light from the window and glowing for an instant before joining the silence on the ground. The granddaughter pulled the blanket her grandmother offered around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender, and something she could not name. Something that might have been the scent of a life lived without apology. She watched her grandmother's face in the firelight. The deep lines around her eyes, the thin white hair tucked behind her ears, the hands wrapped around the teacup with a gentleness that suggested she was holding something more precious than tea. And she thought, for the first time, that perhaps her grandmother was not disappearing up here on the mountain. Perhaps she was arriving. Neither of them spoke, and the not speaking was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people have arrived at the same place without needing to explain how they got there. What the grandmother on the porch understood, and what the woman in the cabin has been practicing, without calling it practice, touches something the old traditions have always pointed toward. In Pali, there is a word anicca. It means impermanence. Everything changes, everything passes. The fire that is burning now will be ash by morning. The snow that is falling now will be water by spring. The body that is breathing now will someday stop. But anicca is not a tragedy. It is not a warning, or a punishment, or a reason to despair. It is simply the truth of how things are. And when you stop fighting it, when you stop trying to freeze the river, and pin the butterfly, and make the fire burn forever, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see each moment as it actually is, unrepeatable, irreplaceable, luminous with its own passing. The fire is beautiful not despite the fact that it will die, but because of it. The snow is beautiful not despite the fact that it will melt, but because of it. And this night, this particular night, with this particular breath, in this particular body, is beautiful not despite the fact that it will end, but because it will end. Because it will never come again. Because you are here for it, and that is enough. In a garden that only came alive after dark, a woman tended flowers that most people would never see. She had planted them deliberately, every one of them chosen for its willingness to bloom when the rest of the world had closed. Night-blooming jasmine along the back fence, its white stars opening as the sun went down, releasing a perfume so sweet and so specific to the dark that smelling it in daylight would have felt like reading someone's diary. Moonflowers climbing the old trellis her husband had built, their enormous white trumpets unfurling at dusk with a slowness that rewarded only those patient enough to watch. Evening primrose scattered through the border beds, their pale yellow faces turning upward as if listening for something only the night sky could say. She came out every evening after dinner, when the light was draining from the sky and the crickets were beginning their long, rhythmic conversation with the dark. She wore an old cardigan that had belonged to her mother and garden shoes that had seen so many seasons they had taken on the shape of her feet. She carried no flashlight. She knew the garden by feel, where each path turned, where each stone sat, where the jasmine leaned closest to the fence. The moon was her light. When it was full, the garden glowed, every white petal catching the silver and holding it, so that the flowers seemed to be lit from within, like paper lanterns hung in the branches of the dark. When the moon was new and the sky was black, she navigated by scent and touch, and the memory of 1,000 previous evenings. Her neighbor, a young woman who had moved in the previous spring, noticed the garden one warm night in July. She was sitting on her own back porch, unable to sleep, and she caught the jasmine first. That unmistakable sweetness, drifting over the fence, like a rumor of something beautiful happening just out of sight. She stood on her toes and looked over, and what she saw stopped her. The garden was glowing. The moonflowers had opened. Enormous, white, impossible. And the old woman was standing among them, perfectly still, her face tilted upward, her eyes closed, breathing the night in, as if it was something she had been thirsty for all day. "Your garden," the young woman said softly, not wanting to startle her. "It is beautiful." The old woman opened her eyes. She did not seem surprised. "Thank you. It has been waiting all day to hear that. But no one sees it. You garden at night. The flowers bloom when everyone is asleep." The old woman walked slowly toward the fence. A moth passed between them, drawn by the jasmine. "The moon sees them," she said. "I see them. The moths see them. They are the best audience, actually. Very enthusiastic." She smiled. "And now you see them. That is enough audience for any flower. But why plant things no one will notice? Because noticing is not the point. Blooming is the point. The flower does not bloom for the audience. It blooms because that is what flowers do. And if someone happens to be awake at the right hour, in the right garden, with the right willingness to look, then that is a gift." For both of them, Ryokan, the wandering monk who lived with almost nothing and needed even less, once wrote, "The wind has settled, the blossoms have fallen. Birds sing, the mountains grow dark. This is the wondrous power of Buddhism." He did not mean temples or sutras or elaborate philosophies. He meant this, the ordinary mystery of a world that keeps happening whether anyone is watching or not. The blossoms fall, the birds sing, the mountains grow dark, and none of it requires your understanding to be complete. The young woman stood at the fence for a long time. The jasmine breathed its sweetness into the warm air between them. A moonflower, fully open now, turned its white face toward the sky, like a bowl waiting to be filled with light. "Can I sit in your garden sometime?" the young woman asked. "You are sitting in it now," the old woman said. "The fence is just a suggestion." They stood together in the garden for a long while after that. The jasmine released its sweetness in slow waves, each breath bringing a slightly different note. Now honey, now vanilla, now something green and alive that had no name. A moonflower that had been tightly closed when the young woman first looked over the fence, now stood fully open. Its white petals spread wide, luminous in the moonlight, patient as a held breath. Somewhere in the dark, a cricket paused, and in the pause, the silence was so complete that the young woman could hear her own heartbeat, steady, ancient, asking nothing of her. What the woman in the cabin knows about solitude, and what the night gardener knows about blooming in the dark, is something your body has been practicing every night of your life without ever being taught. Every night you close your eyes and let go of the world. You release your grip on the day, on the faces, the conversations, the worries, the plans, and you dissolve into something you cannot name. And every morning you return. Not the same person, exactly, but close enough. Changed in ways too subtle to measure, but changed. Sleep is the ultimate mystery. It is the one journey you take every night into a country you cannot map, cannot control, cannot even remember visiting. And yet, you have been making that journey since the day you were born. You have been trusting the dark since before you had words for trust. Ajahn Chah once said, "The Dhamma is right here. It is not somewhere far away. It is right here in this body, right here in this mind. And perhaps tonight, the Dhamma, the truth, the way things are, is right here in this breath, in this darkness, in this willingness to let the day end, without knowing what tomorrow will bring." The darkness is not your enemy tonight. It is your oldest companion. It has held you every night of your life. Through fevers and heartbreaks and ordinary Tuesdays that you have long since forgotten. It has never once dropped you. It has never once failed to give you back to the morning. So rest in it. Rest in the mystery, the way the moonflower rests in the dark, not waiting for the light, not anxious for the dawn, but blooming right here, right now, in the only moment that has ever existed. Let the body be heavy. Let the breath be slow. Let the mystery hold you the way it has always held you. Gently, completely, without needing you to understand. When you are ready, we will continue together. And when you have rested long enough in the mystery, when the dark has become not a place you endure, but a place you belong, you will find that this journey was never about arriving somewhere. It was never about figuring it all out or finding the one answer that makes everything make sense. It was about learning to rest along the way, learning that the resting is the arriving, and that you have been home all along. And when you have rested long enough in the mystery, when the dark has become not a place you endure but a place you belong, you will find that this journey was never about arriving somewhere. It was never about figuring it all out or finding the one answer that makes everything make sense. It was about learning to rest along the way, learning that the resting is the arriving and that you have been home all along. So let us gather everything together now. Let us walk one last path before the night takes you. On a night in late spring, when the rain had stopped an hour ago and the world was still dripping, a woman walked a path she had walked 1,000 times. It was the path behind her house, a narrow dirt trail that wound through a meadow and along the edge of a pond, and then back again, making a loop that took exactly 20 minutes if you walked with purpose, and considerably longer if you did not. Tonight, she did not. She was 69 years old, and she had lived in this house for most of her adult life. Her children had grown up playing in this meadow. Her husband had proposed to her beside the pond on a summer evening so long ago that the memory had worn soft at the edges, like a stone that has been carried in a pocket for decades. She had walked this path in every season and every mood, in grief and in joy, in worry and in gratitude, in the blinding heat of August and the bitter dark of January. She knew every route that crossed the trail, every place where the ground dipped and held water after rain, every spot where the wildflowers came first in spring. But tonight, she was seeing it for the first time. The moon was nearly full, not quite, just a sliver missing from one edge, as if someone had taken a small bite and then thought better of it. It hung low in the sky, enormous and gold, the way the moon looks when it has just risen and is still close enough to the earth to seem like something you could touch. Its light fell across the meadow in a wash that turned the wet grass to silver and made each blade shine separately, so that the field looked less like a meadow and more like a lake of tiny lights stretching in every direction. The air was warm and damp and carried the particular smell that comes after spring rain. The smell of everything opening at once, of soil releasing what it has been holding all winter, of green things growing so fast you can almost hear them. Somewhere in the grass, crickets had resumed their conversation. That endless, rhythmic chorus that is not music exactly, but is not music either. A sound so old that the first human ears to hear it heard the same song. She walked slowly. Her shoes were wet. She did not care. There was a time in her life when she would have walked this path while thinking about something else entirely. Tomorrow's meeting, the children's schedules, the grocery list, the argument she had with her sister, the bill she forgot to pay. She had spent decades walking through beautiful places while her mind was somewhere else, solving problems that had already been solved, or rehearsing conversations that would never happen. She had been so busy figuring things out that she had walked past 10,000 sunsets and 100 full moons, and the slow, daily miracle of grass growing after rain. But tonight, perhaps because she was older now, perhaps because the rain had washed the air clean, perhaps because something in her had finally grown tired of solving, she was not thinking about anything. She was simply walking, and the walking was enough. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that every step can be a prayer, not a prayer directed at anyone or anything, not a request or a petition or a negotiation with the universe, but a prayer in the oldest sense of the word, which is simply an act of attention, a way of saying, with the body instead of the mouth, I am here, I notice, I am grateful for this. She stopped beside the pond. The water was black and still, and the moon lay on its surface like a golden coin someone had dropped and decided not to retrieve. A frog called once from the far bank, a single clear note. And then the silence returned, fuller than before, the way silence always is after a sound has passed through it. She sat down on the wet grass. She did not mind the dampness soaking through her clothes. She had reached the age where small discomforts no longer registered as complaints. They were simply part of being in a body, in a world, on a night that would never come again. She thought about her life, not in the organized sequential way she usually thought about it, not as a timeline or a resume or a list of accomplishments and failures, but as a feeling, a texture, the way you remember a childhood home not by its address, but by the way the light fell through the kitchen window in the morning, or the way the stairs creaked in a pattern you could recognize in your sleep. She had been a teacher for 30 years. She had raised 2 children who had grown into people she admired, but did not always understand. She had been married and then widowed and then alone. And the alone had been hard at first, like a coat that did not fit, and then gradually, imperceptibly, it had become comfortable. Not happy exactly, but honest. The kind of aloneness that does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. She had spent so many years trying to figure it all out, trying to be a good enough mother, a good enough teacher, a good enough wife, a good enough widow, trying to make the right decisions, save the right amount, say the right things at the right times. And the trying had been exhausting, not because it was hard, but because it never ended. There was always one more thing to figure out, one more problem to solve, one more list to complete before she could rest. But tonight, sitting on the wet grass with the moon on the water, and the frogs beginning their slow chorus from the far bank, She felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt finished, not in the sense of being done with life. She had years left. She hoped, and she intended to use them. But finished in the sense of being done with the figuring out, done with the relentless effort to make everything make sense, done with the exam. The exam was over. It had been over for a long time. She had simply forgotten to put her pen down, and, sitting there, with the meadow shining around her like something that had been polished by the rain, she knew, not thought, but knew, the way you know the temperature of bath water, without needing a thermometer, that she had never needed to figure it all out, that the figuring out had been a beautiful, exhausting detour, and the destination had been here all along, right here, on a path she had walked 1,000 times and never seen. Tonight, if you close your eyes, you might see them. The retired school principal, sitting at her kitchen table, her pen still, her list finally blank, watching the light move across the floor and finding that the moving was enough. The mother in her garden, kneeling beside the roses she planted when her children were small, learning to let them bloom in their own time. The widow, standing on the back porch in May, watching cosmos flowers sway in the light. Flowers planted by a hand that was gone, but had left behind one last surprise. The old weaver, her shuttle moving back and forth in the morning light, trusting each thread without needing to see the whole cloth. The professor, sitting in her dark study after the cleaning woman left, looking at the stars for the first time. The fisherman, sitting in his boat on a misty lake, casting a line into water he could not see, content with whatever the lake chose to give. The retired nurse, holding a 30-year-old photograph at her kitchen table, discovering that the life she had lived was not insufficient. It was already full, already beautiful, already enough. The flower seller at the market, cutting stems before dawn, placing beauty into the hands of strangers for 50 years. The woman by the river, watching leaves drift downstream, learning to stop swimming. The baker, her hands in the dough at midnight, trusting the heat and the time. The woman in the cabin on the mountain, sitting by the fire in winter, having stopped needing to know what comes next. The night gardener, standing among moonflowers, blooming in the dark, because that is what flowers do. Not one of them figured it all out. Not one of them found the answer that made everything make sense, and every single one of them found peace. Not the peace of certainty, not the peace of having all the questions answered and all the plans in place and all the loose ends tied, but the peace of letting go, the peace of trusting, the peace that arrives when the mind finally sets down its clipboard and its calendar and its endless, exhausting lists and simply rests. And you who are lying here tonight, in whatever room you are in whatever country, at whatever hour, you are one of them. You are the woman at the kitchen table. You are the gardener. You are the weaver and the nurse and the baker and the woman by the river. You have been swimming, you have been planning, you have been holding on so tightly that your hands have forgotten they know how to open. But tonight, they remember. Tonight, you do not need to figure anything out. Not the big questions, not the meaning of your life or the shape of your future, or whether the choices you have made were the right ones. And not the small questions either, not tomorrow's schedule, or the email you forgot to send, or the conversation you keep replaying. None of it needs your attention tonight. None of it needs your solving. All of it can wait. All of it will still be there in the morning, if you want it. And if you do not want it, if the morning arrives and some of those worries have dissolved in the night, the way dreams dissolve, the way fog dissolves when the sun touches it, then that is fine too. Some things are only problems when you are tired. Some questions answer themselves when you stop asking them. You have done enough. You have carried enough. You have held on long enough. And the fact that you are here tonight, listening, breathing, still showing up after everything, after all the years and all the effort and all the nights when sleep did not come easily, is proof that you are stronger, not the loud kind of strong, the quiet kind, the willow kind, the kind that bends and bends and bends and is still standing in the morning. Ajahn Chah, near the end of his life, offered this. Everything arises and passes away. When you see this, you are above sorrow. This is the shining way. You do not need to understand those words tonight. You do not need to memorize them or analyze them or write them down. Just let them land wherever they land. In the body, in the breath, in whatever part of you is still listening. And if they land nowhere, that is fine too. The words were not the point. The resting was the point. Now, let the body begin its final descent into rest. Begin with the forehead. Notice how it feels right now. Perhaps there is a tightness there, a line of tension that has been holding since morning, a crease between the brows that has been trying to solve something all day. Let it smooth, not because you are telling it to, but because there is nothing left tonight that requires your brow to furrow. Let the forehead become wide and open, like a sky that has finished storming. Let the eyes rest behind closed lids. They have been working all day, scanning, reading, searching, watching. They have earned this dark. Let them sink back into the quiet warmth of the skull, as if they are settling into a bath they have been waiting for. The jaw, release it. You may not have realized you were clenching it. Most people do not, but there is a small muscle at the hinge of the jaw that holds more tension than any other muscle in the body. Let it soften. Let the teeth part slightly. Let the tongue rest heavy on the floor of the mouth, touching nothing, pressing nothing, just lying there like a sleeping cat on a warm floor. The shoulders now, let them drop. They have been carrying the day, carrying it the way they always do, hitched slightly upward, braced against whatever might come next. But nothing is coming next. The day is done. Let the shoulders fall away from the ears and feel the space that opens when they do. The neck lengthening, the chest widening, the breath finding room it did not have before. The hands. Open them. If they are curled into fists or tucked tightly against the body, let them uncurl. Let the fingers soften and separate. Let the palms turn upward if they want to, or rest heavy on the blanket if they do not. These are the hands that have been holding on to plans, to worries, to the steering wheel and the phone and the 1,000 small objects of a busy life. Tonight, they hold nothing, and the nothing feels like everything. Let the heaviness travel down through the chest. Feel the ribcage soften, the breath becoming deeper and slower, each exhale carrying a little more of the day out into the dark. The belly relaxes. It has been held tight all day, held in, held together, bracing against the world the way a drum skin braces against the air. But tonight, there is no need for bracing. Let the belly be soft. Let it rise and fall with the breath like a small boat on a calm sea, lifted and lowered by a tide so gentle it barely qualifies as movement. The hips, the legs, feel the weight of them, how heavy they have become, how the muscles that carried you through today have finally released their hold. The thighs sink. The calves sink. The feet, which have been meeting the ground all day, now rest. The arches relax. The toes uncurl. Even the ankles, those faithful hinges that never once complained, soften into stillness. Feel how the bed or the couch or whatever is holding you takes more and more of your weight with each breath. You are not falling. You are being received. The way the earth receives the rain, the way the river receives the leaf, the way the night receives the day, the way everything that has been held up, eventually, gratefully, is set down. There is nothing left to hold. There is nothing left to carry. The body knows this, even if the mind is still catching up. And the body is patient. It will wait for the mind, the way a mother waits for a child who is not quite ready to come inside, standing at the door, leaving the light on, knowing that the child will come when the child is ready. Now let the images from tonight begin to blur, the way things blur when you are watching from a train window. Still recognizable, still beautiful, but moving past you now, softly, gently, like a river of stories flowing downstream. The leaves on the autumn river, turning gold in the afternoon light, spiraling down to the water and drifting away. The snow falling past the cabin window, each flake glowing for one instant and then disappearing into the dark. The moonflower opening in the garden, its white face turned toward a sky it cannot see. The bread rising in the old brick oven, warm and patient and full of trust. The willow bending in the wind and standing up again, unhurried, unbroken. The old woman on the porch, watching fireflies with her granddaughter, discovering that not knowing is its own kind of wealth. The woman on the path tonight, sitting on wet grass beside a moonlit pond, finally putting down her pen. Each image drifts past like a leaf on the river. You do not need to catch any of them. You do not need to hold them. They were always going to pass. And what they leave behind, the warmth, the quiet, the feeling of being held by something larger than yourself, that stays. That does not need to be held because it is doing the holding. Shunryu Suzuki once said something so simple. It is almost easy to miss. Just to be alive is enough. Just to be alive. Just to be breathing. In a body, on a night. In a world that is vast and strange, and more beautiful than you will ever understand. That is enough. That has always been enough. The stories are dissolving now, the way all stories dissolve. Eventually, not into nothing, but into the quiet feeling they leave behind. The way a song dissolves when it ends. And what remains is not the melody, but the space the melody opened inside you. The way a conversation dissolves, and what remains is not the words, but the warmth of being heard. Let them go. The stories were never meant to be held. They were meant to carry you here, to this moment, to this breath, to this place where the mind grows quiet and the body grows heavy, and the night it opens its arms. The words are growing softer now. The voice is becoming quieter, like a candle, burning low, not going out, just dimming to match the dark. You do not have to figure it all out. You never did. The river is flowing. The bread is rising. The moonflower is blooming. The willow is bending and straightening and bending again. And you are resting. Finally, truly, deeply resting. Not because you earned it, not because you solved anything, but because rest was always here, waiting for you, the way the moon waits behind the clouds, patient, whole, unchanged by whether anyone looks up to see it. The breath slows, the body softens, the mind, that beautiful, tireless, worried mind, the one that has been running the exam for decades, quits at last. Not because you told it to, but because there is nothing left to solve. The moon is on the water. The night is holding you. Good night. Sleep well, dear one. The mystery will keep you safe until morning. The breath breathes itself now. You do not need to guide it. You do not need to count it. It knows the way. It has always known the way. In and out. In and out. Like the tide. Like the river. Like the old baker's hands. Moving through the dough without thought. Without effort. Without needing to understand why. And somewhere, in a garden you cannot see, a moonflower is blooming. Its white petals are opening in the dark, slowly, silently, for no audience at all. And it does not mind. Blooming is its own reward. Breathing is its own reward. Being alive, tonight, in this body, on this earth, that is its own reward. The morning will come. It always does. Not because you planned it, not because you set an alarm or wrote it on a list, but because that is what mornings do. They arrive, gently, without being asked, the way sleep is arriving now, the way peace has been arriving all along. Rest now. Rest.